afternoon. If you could please take your seats. Welcome. So a very warm welcome to everyone attending either in person here at Manhattanville College Reed Castle in Purchase, New York, or joining us online via Zoom. We are delighted to have you here with us today. My name is Nikolina Gelmanovsky. I'm serving as chair of the United Nations Association's Human Rights Day 2023 event. And we are commemorating the 75th anniversary of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our president, Marcia Brewster, sends her greetings all the way from Thailand and regrets that she can't be here with us all, but hopes that we all have a great time today. So today marks the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this was signed by the UN General Assembly in Paris, France on December 10th, 1948. The Declaration articulates the fundamental rights inherent to all people and serves as a guiding framework for laws and policies at every level of governance. It also constitutes the bedrock of the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And along with the UN Charter, it spells out the foundational principles of the United Nations. Spearheaded by Eleanor Roosevelt and the director of the UN's Human Rights Division, the declaration was composed by a dedicated commission of 18 international members. Roosevelt, in collaboration with influential delegates from nations including France, Lebanon, and China, was a pivotal force in the declaration's ratification, advocating for its principles with unwavering commitment. Mrs. Roosevelt is recognized as the driving force for the declaration's adoption. Eleanor Roosevelt was also one of the founders of the predecessor to our United Nations Association, which was founded in 1943. Our UNA-USA is the largest group of advocates for the United Nations in the world, with over 22,000 members. UNA Westchester is one of the oldest chapters in the country, and we urge you all to visit Ronnie at our membership table and register if you have not already done so. Eleanor Roosevelt also played a foundational role in establishing the organization that would become the United Nations Association. Gathered under the theme Equality, Freedom, and Justice for All, Human Rights Impacts on the Ground, we are privileged to welcome our esteemed guest speakers to share their perspectives with us today. Our keynote speaker, Ms. Stephanie Ferrier, is an international expert on the Declaration, and through her work has made pivotal contributions to the landscape of human rights globally. We will also benefit from the insights of two esteemed local human rights experts, Mr. Tejas Sanchala and Judge Veris Shako. After their presentations, we will welcome all speakers back to the stage for a thought-provoking Q&A session, offering a chance to delve into the practical application of human rights principles. I'd like to thank the members of the program committee and UNA Westchester's board who contributed so much to this event. We are also very grateful to our distinguished co-sponsors, Mercy University, the Links Incorporated Westchester County Chapter, the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Zeta Nu Omega Chapter, and Westpac Foundation. We are delighted to collaborate with Manhattanville College, the Clark Scholars, and the wonderful Mr. Craig Donnelly, who have all contributed to this beautiful venue and the reception to follow after the program. We're also privileged to be joined by some local and national leaders, whether here in person or joining us virtually. Representative Jamal Bowman, who has offered a recorded video message, and in person, State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, also Assembly Member Mary Jane Shimsky. We're honored to have you all with us today. As we move forward with today's program, let us all reflect on the impact of the Declaration, celebrate its influence on laws and policies worldwide, and recommit ourselves to its principles of equality, freedom, and justice. Before we begin our program, I would like to call on Dr. Connolly to welcome our participants on behalf of the Links Incorporated. Dr. Connolly, if you are joining us here today. Okay, Dr. Connolly, oh, please do. Thank you. Thank you. The Links Incorporated. All right, we have Dr. Priscilla Hambrick-Dixon from the Links Incorporated here. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually representing, her name is Jacqueline Boucher. She couldn't be here today. And I'm one of the members of the Westchester County chapter of the Links Incorporated. So I'm going to share with you what she would like me to have shared. The Westchester County chapter of the Links Incorporated joins with those assembled today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's more important than ever to understand and embrace these fundamental principles that are at the core of the shared humanity. Human rights are the basic rights and freedoms that belong to every person in the world from birth until death. These rights are based on shared values like dignity, fairness, equality, respect, and independence for all human beings. In today's interconnected world, where information and ideas flow freely across borders, understanding human rights is not just important, it is essential. Human rights help to navigate the complexities of our global society that equip us to address challenges, and we know there are many these days, such as inequality, injustice, and discrimination. The 75th anniversary of the UDHR is a significant milestone. This landmark document has inspired the development of human rights laws and standards worldwide and has been a beacon of hope and a source of inspiration for people fighting for justice and equality. The Westchester County chapter of the Links extends a special thank you to the United Nations Association Westchester chapter for this important event, for sponsoring and asking us to sponsor this important event. Together, we will continue to embrace the opportunity to educate, inspire, and carry forward the legacy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you to the Links Incorporated for being here today and for co-sponsoring this event. And may I also call upon Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority Zeta Nu Omega chapter. Do we have any representation? All right, please come up. Thank you, Dr. Karen Williams. The floor is yours.
I will be brief because my chapter sister, who is also a member of Zeta Nu Omega chapter, spoke so eloquently. Good afternoon, everyone. It is our esteemed honor and privilege to be here as members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We are proud and longtime partners of the Westchester chapter of the United Nations Association, and we stand hand in hand with you as we have this important discussion today. As I think about everything that's going on in the world, and you all think about everything that's going on in the world, this conversation is so timely. And while we focus on the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights for All, I am looking forward to a conversation where we can take away next steps. Sometimes when you watch what's going on in the world. You know what you know, but still feel so helpless. And so as we are both community service organizations in Alpha Kappa Alpha, as well as the Links, our takeaways are service to all mankind and serving the community on a global scale. And so I sit here not only as a co-sponsor, but as a partner in service, looking forward to see how we can advance the work of this incredible and critical organization. So thank you so much for allowing Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Zeta Nu Omega chapter to continue in our partnership with this work. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you, Alpha Kappa Alpha. Next, I'd like to call upon Dr. Allison Carson, Associate Provost of Manhattanville College, to welcome us all today. A warm welcome for Dr. Carson.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is really a treat. My name is Allison Carson. I'm Associate Provost here at the college, but I also have a special relationship with the UN that I wanted to share with you. My full name is Allison Stettinius Carson, and I am the great-grand-niece of Edward Stettinius Jr., who was Secretary of State in 1945, who was very involved in the founding of the UN. So this is really exciting for me to actually be here with you today, and I'm really honored to be invited. I want to say a few words about the role of Manhattanville and speak to some of our own history with regard to human rights, because I think it's a really important piece that we need to make sure that we're thinking about today. The Declaration of Human Rights says, and you've all read it, but we're going to spend a bit of time on it again. It states, it proclaims this universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms. I wanted to draw attention to that as an educational institution by teaching and education. Manhattanville has long been committed to these particular goals. As a Catholic women's college in the early 20th century, Manhattanville was on the forefront of advocating for both interracial justice and women's rights. This is demonstrated by Manhattanville's early involvement and also demonstrated by Mother Damon's Principles and Prejudices speech, where she provided a strong principle-based justification for the admission of the school's first Black student. She wrote, "Prejudices come from narrowness of outlook, from not knowing enough, from having a limited education, or rather an education which is not really education, but a one-sided form of instruction." She continued in this speech, "We are educators. Should we be untrue to our nature and our end if we talked to you without giving you principles, specifically the principle of the oneness and equality of the human race, which show racial discrimination to be an unjust and therefore immoral thing." Following this particular speech, Pope Pius XI announced a call for the heads of Catholic colleges and universities to speak out against racial justice, evidence of the impact of her speech. Additionally, the National Federation of Catholic College Students was very active between 1937 and 1967, and much of that work was being done right here at Manhattanville College. The NFCCS played an important role in the civil rights movements and other social action for the mid-20th century. The Interracial Quarterly, the journal of the NFCCS, was actually edited and published right here at Manhattanville College. And they sponsored an annual Interjustice Interracial Justice Week. So we have a long history of this kind of work. That work continues today. I'm very excited to share with you that we have a brand new major that is about to start in the fall. And it's an interdisciplinary major called Global Justice and Human Rights. So we're really, really excited that that's going to be, thank you. One of our distinguished alumna, Kitty Pilgrim, is here today and was very involved in developing that major with us. So we're really excited about it. Today is a real celebration, and we are really excited that you are here at Manhattanville College to do that celebrating. So congratulations, the UN, and we're really looking forward to this day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson, and thank you to Manhattanville College. And now we're very pleased to share a message from Congressman Jamal Bowman, representative of New York's 16th Congressional District. I'll ask our tech team to bring the video up on screen.
It's my absolute honor and privilege to bring greetings to you this morning and to wish all of you a happy Human Rights Day. First and foremost, thank you so much for continuing to do the work as it relates to human rights and leaning in to this important issue, which is so critical to everything that happens globally, but also everything that happens domestically. Too often we talk about democracy, we talk about our society, we talk about government, we talk about all these things, but we often don't talk about them through the lens and from the perspective of human rights. Housing is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. Access to clean drinking water is a human right. Food security and access to healthy foods is a human right. Ensuring equitable and quality education for all of our children is a human right. Making sure people are safe and not living in circumstances where they have to deal with toxic stress and chronic trauma is a human right. And our collective fight for human rights is about our collective humanity. And one of the things that presents great challenges, but also great opportunities, is our history of separation and segregation and not really having the knowledge or understanding of each other based on our backgrounds and ethnicities and where we come from. But that presents an opportunity for us to come together, learn from one another, and build a world that works for everyone, that is centered in our collective humanity. So as a member of Congress, as a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, as a member of the Education and Workforce Committee and the Science, Space, and Tech Committee, and as a lifelong educator for 20 years, and as a father, as a husband, as a human being, I have dedicated my life to fighting for the human rights of all people, and I thank you for doing the same. So peace and love to you all. Thank you for your work. Sorry I couldn't be there with you today, but I'm there with you in spirit, and my heart will always be with you. And please do not hesitate to reach out to our office so that we can work together for our shared humanity. Thank you so much.
Well, a big thanks to Congressman Bowman and his team for those lovely remarks. And before I get into introducing our speakers, I'd like to invite you all to take a piece of paper. Actually, Raina, maybe you can come and help me hand out some paper here. We're going to distribute some cards to our audience and some pens to our audience. And please, during the sessions, during the presentations, jot down any questions that you might have for our speakers so that when we're conducting the Q&A, we can pull from those questions. And we'll come around to collect your questions right before the Q&A starts. Thank you, Raina and Paul. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished keynote, Ms. Stephanie Ferrier. A longtime international human rights activist and law professor, Stephanie Ferrier has engaged in advocacy at the United Nations and other international organizations, and with government officials, legislators, the police, prison officials, and the judiciary. Her work includes writing amicus briefs in cases before the US Supreme Court, the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and the US Bureau of Immigration Appeals. She was a full-time law professor at Penn State and Vermont law schools for a total of 30 years, and also taught courses at Georgetown and George Washington University law schools, as well as the University of Oxford. Her most recent faculty appointment was as Distinguished Lecturer in Human Rights at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College here in New York. The former legal director of Amnesty International, based at the organization's International Secretariat in London, Ferrier was also a founding board member of the Center for Justice and Accountability, which helps survivors of torture and other severe human rights abuses hold the perpetrators accountable. She served as a legal expert on fact-finding and high-level missions examining human rights in India, Malawi, Pakistan, and Yemen. She served as a consultant to the UN Special Rapporteurs on violence against women, on extrajudicial killings, and on cultural rights, and engaged with UN human rights treaty bodies, including the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Committee Against Torture, and the Human Rights Committee. Ferrier serves on the panel of legal experts for the Trial Watch program of the Clooney Foundation for Justice, and is a past member of the Human Rights Watch Advisory Committee on the Environment and Human Rights. She regularly advises international and grassroots NGOs on how to use the United Nations in their advocacy, most recently in a training she conducted for women's rights defenders from Afghanistan. At the invitation of the NAACP, she also conducted a training for lawyers on the international human rights standards relevant to advocacy for racial and economic justice in the United States. Stephanie Ferrier was born in Bangkok and grew up there and in Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo, and Washington, D.C. She's also lived in Athens, Avignon, and London. She holds a BA from Macalester College, an MA from the University of Pennsylvania, and law degrees from the American University Washington College of Law and Harvard Law School. Please give a very warm welcome to our lovely keynote, Ms. Ferrier. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
I meant to bring my water bottle up too. Right. Okay. So are my, ready for my PowerPoints to go up? Oh, they're all right. So on the 60th anniversary, the then UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said the declaration is a single short document of 30 articles that has probably had more impact on mankind than any other document in modern history. Okay. So what led the UN to draft such a document? How did they determine what constituted human rights? What were some of the issues they grappled with as they put this document together? How did they determine what was a right in the first place, as opposed to just something good to have, right? So when the UN was established at the close of World War II, right, the drafters of the treaty that created the organization, the UN Charter, decided that they would include as one of the very purposes of the organization that one purpose is to achieve international cooperation in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. We know that the UN was established, Article 1, Paragraph 1 says to maintain international peace and security. And they understood that to actually achieve peace and security, that respect for human rights was needed. But they didn't stop there. One of the purposes of the UN is to promote and encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction, meaning without discrimination on the basis of race, sex, language, or religion. This is actually the only specific human right that is included in the UN Charter, the non-discrimination principle. The non-discrimination principle lies at the very foundation of human rights. So we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's for all. And the fact that these rights are held by all is embedded right there in the UN Charter itself. The references to human rights appear 7 times in the Charter. The UN General Assembly has a specific role with respect to human rights. The Economic and Social Council does. UN member states have specific pledges they make to promote respect for human rights. So of course they needed to know, well, what are these human rights? So determining the answer to this question fell to the UN Commission on Human Rights. Now that commission was created by the Economic and Social Council. The charter says that ECOSOC shall create commissions on human rights. Amongst other things, they created the UN Commission on Human Rights. This is the one that elected Eleanor Roosevelt to be the chair. We've heard a bit about her role already today. Now, they're working on this, but in the meantime, people all around the world knew that this new organization, this new world organization, was created in part to promote human rights. And all these petitions started being sent in, petitions and appeals to the UN. Here's what's going on in our country. Please help. And so among those who turned to the organization for help in addressing grave human rights violations was the NAACP. In 1947, the NAACP submitted a petition to the head of the Human Rights Division of the UN. It was edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, who was then the director of research at the NAACP. And it sought action to address the rampant racial discrimination that permeated life in the United States. And it was called An Appeal to the World, a statement on the denial of human rights to minorities in the case of citizens of Negro descent in the United States of America, and an appeal to the United Nations for redress. Well, at the time, there was no entity within the UN for dealing with petitions. Literally, I mean, there were tens of thousands of petitions they received, and they took no action because they hadn't developed any mechanisms, and it took, as a whole nother story, a long time to get there. Okay, so the members of the Commission on Human Rights who are drafting this, what became the Universal Declaration, as was pointed out, came from a number of countries. We have, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt, who chaired the declaration. And I have to say, she did a masterful job. Some of the things going on during the drafting, first of all, the Cold War was thankfully not hot, but close to it. When you read the drafting I spent a summer reading all the drafting documents, and Soviet and US delegates took the opportunity to use those drafting sessions as ways to kind of dig at each other, which was good in a way because it really raised to the surface the human rights violations that were happening in both regions. We've also heard mention of some of the others who took leading roles in drafting this declaration. Charles Malik from Lebanon. We have Bogomolov from the USSR. Some of the exchanges between Bogomolov and Roosevelt are priceless. And then we have Dr. Zhang from China. Remember, this was nationalist China. This was before the communists took over. René Cassin of France, you may have heard of. He's renowned for his role as well. Just mention Hernan Santa Cruz figured largely, prominently. And then John Humphrey. I want to mention John Humphrey because he is an important part of the story that sometimes gets left out. He actually wasn't a delegate from a country. He ran the UN Human Rights Division. And he did the very first draft and worked very carefully to help with Eleanor to shepherd it through. Now, you might notice something from these images that are on the screen. All right. So here's some people who are missing from it, who also played important roles. Yes, yes. You'll hear more about a couple of these people in a minute. Every one of these women was just an extraordinary leader on human rights and played a critically important role. Okay. So, all right, we know the document being drafted. I love the statement on universality. I just had to share it with you. They're universally held human rights. So one of my students, when I was teaching at Hunter, her universality is something that's most important to the marginalized, and it's something that's an afterthought to the most privileged. And I think, what a cogent observation. So true. And as it happens, actually, the very, very, very first meeting of the drafting committee of the Universal Declaration, the members of the commission who were given the role of doing the initial discussions, the very first meeting was actually at Hunter College, believe it or not, when its campus was up in the Bronx. So what is it that makes something a right and not just a privilege or something nice, right? So something's a right, a human right, if you need it for life, for your life, to sustain life, and not just dragging from one day to another, but a life of dignity. The concept of dignity has already been mentioned this morning. Fundamental to the notion of human rights. Every single human rights treaty, you will see dignity, human dignity mentioned there. So the process the commission chose for figuring out what to put in this document was, one thing they did, collected constitutions. They asked for countries all around the world, send in your provisions of constitutions that talk about rights, send in your legislation about rights. They also consulted with philosophers and thinkers and people like Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, his response, they asked him what rights should be included, what rights are rights held by all. And his response was, well, you have to think about what duties do people owe each other. Because if people fulfill their duties to each other, then we all achieve our human rights, right? They also received proposals from trade unions and civil society organizations. So the draft made its way through the UN process, reached the floor of the General Assembly on December 10th, 75 years ago today, and was adopted without any UN member state voting against it. Now, sometimes you hear, oh, it was adopted unanimously, and you can chuckle knowingly and say, well, actually, that's not true. There were 48 states voted for it, 0 states voted against, but 8 states abstained, meaning they didn't vote for or against, they just abstained from voting. There were the 6 Soviet bloc countries that abstained, and they were very heavily involved in drafting the language. They kept proposing amendments that didn't get adopted, okay? But they disagreed with the very notion, right, that human rights are rights that people have independent of the state, and that they could actually be invoked against the state. And that was something that the Soviet bloc states couldn't brook. Then we have Saudi Arabia, which disagreed with 2 provisions. One was equal marriage rights, and the other is the freedom to change religion. Okay, but other countries, UN member states with Muslim populations, that didn't prevent them from voting for it. And they include Syria, Iran, Turkey, and Pakistan. And then we have South Africa. So apartheid South Africa, which actually, I mean, it's just, I'm glad I can still be shocked, but you know, when you read that they actually said on the floor of the General Assembly that, oh no, this concept, this notion that all human beings are equal, you know, that's not a universally held concept. Yeah, so, but they didn't vote against the declaration. The fact that no state voted against it, actually, I think is important in the fact that even though it's not a binding treaty, it's not a treaty, it's not binding, it's a resolution of the General Assembly, right? But it has over the many years and continues to hold very powerful moral, legal, and political weight. It's actually either in the constitutions of at least 90 countries, either explicitly incorporate the Universal Declaration, or from the wording, you can tell it came right from the Declaration itself. It's been cited in court judgments, legislation, and so on. So let's take a look at what it contains. And there are wonderful things in the preamble. I don't have time for that, so I'll just go straight to Article 1. Very first article. How does it begin? Well, here's how the draft began. All men are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And it actually, believe it or not, the very, very first draft began everyone is born free and equal. And the UK delegate suggested, oh, it should say all men. And people agreed, including Eleanor. Yeah. So it was all men through all the many, many different stages of drafting and right way down the line in the drafting process. And we have the delegate from India, Hansa Mehta, to thank for the fact that it says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So she said, if all men is the term used, that could be interpreted to exclude women. And Eleanor countered, well, the word men is used in this sense is generally accepted to include all human beings. So it was through Hansa Mehta and the Danish delegate, Bodil Begtrup, as well as a message from then UN Secretary General Trygve Lie, that led finally to the change quite late in the process to read all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. In other words, this lobbying was meant to ensure that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights included women in that universe, right? Okay. Now, the second article, the non-discrimination principle, again, at the very foundation of all human rights. And it says everyone's entitled to all the rights in the Declaration without distinction, meaning without discriminating, without distinction of any kind, such as, and you see a much longer list than we saw in the UN Charter. The UN Charter said without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And I don't have time to go into it, but the quite interesting discussion over the categories to include, and in fact, even including race and color, because it was recognized, acknowledged that race is this sort of human made up thing. And it's really skin tone that was leading to discrimination. So they finally settled, oh, let's just include both, because they didn't want it to be said that maybe the UN Charter didn't actually prohibit what people might understand. So anyway, and it says or other status. They knew they weren't going to list everything. Or other status. So let's think about this concept further, because most human rights violations take place because of one or more of these characteristics. So what about disability? It's not explicitly mentioned. In 1948, not a lot of people's consciousness was really that raised about people with disabilities and the rights violations they experience. So what is it that these characteristics have in common? They're all something that you either can't change, your social origin, okay, or it's something that you shouldn't be forced to change just to avoid being subjected to a human rights violation. You shouldn't be forced to change your religion or political opinion and so forth. And so disability, does that fall within the category? Could it other status? Sure. What about discrimination against LGBTQ people? Does that fall within this general grouping? Sure. And it's well established now in the UN human rights system that discrimination against LGBTQ people is prohibited. You can think of many additional examples. Marital status. Oh, I'm not going to hire you because you're married or pregnant, right? Or age, or many, many categories. As long as it's something that you can't change, or that's fundamental to your core being, or that you shouldn't have to change just to not be subjected to a human rights violation. And by the way, in international law, discrimination is prohibited even if it's unintentional. There's some, to my view, just bizarre US approach to discrimination law in a number of areas where, oh, well, they didn't really mean to do it. So even though you're being deprived of your rights, just, well, they didn't mean to do it, so it's okay, we're not going to do anything about it. No, 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 no. It's absolutely not what international law allows. It's not a valid excuse. Okay. Now, Article 3, don't worry, I don't go into as much detail on all of them, but the non-discrimination principle is just too important not to spend some time on. So we have as life, liberty, and security of person. On some of these articles, I'm just going to give modern day examples, right? How they are relevant, perhaps locally, because I know the focus of this event is to look at human rights and then what is happening locally, what can be done locally. Okay, so just one example. Remember, all of these rights, think of them in conjunction with the non-discrimination clause. You have the right to life without discrimination, without being discriminated against. Let's look at maternal mortality. All right. The CDC study showing that Black women are at least 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. And they attribute this, the study says, social factors such as historical exposure to racial trauma, which we know continues through several generations. Discrimination, marginalization, systemic barriers such as systemic racism and implicit bias within the healthcare system, which in and of itself is a huge issue, and so forth. Reduced access to reproductive healthcare services and socioeconomic factors. So this would show a violation of the right to life without discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, economic status, and all the work that goes into this, and it continues to be a huge problem. Okay. Okay, so we have a number of additional articles here that might look familiar to many of you from the US Bill of Rights. It's similar, issues. These are in the category of civil rights, political rights. And so let's look at these and consider which ones are relevant to being pulled over by the police for a DWB, right? The driving while black. It's conduct that's supposed to form the basis for a reasonable suspicion of a traffic violation or other misconduct. It's not the color of someone's skin. So we see several articles relevant here. Equality before the law, equal protection of the law, no arbitrary arrest or detention. And I also would suggest degrading treatment, the second one in the list here, very degrading treatment. Now, this one shows who drafted the declaration. It was state representatives of governments, and they do not want to change laws regarding their borders and who they let in and under what status and so forth. There was discussion, should it be the right to be granted asylum? They weren't going to go that far. There's a right to seek asylum. Okay, there you go. Okay, we have marriage rights, right to own property, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Again, read these in conjunction with the non-discrimination clause. Let's look at the right to own property. Okay, you have to have this right without discrimination. So the redlining engaged in by banks and the continuing legacy of redlining, right? So institutional racial bias used by banks, determining where they would give loans, grant loans, and restricted minority home ownership to certain areas considered risky. Oh, what makes an area risky for them to loan? Oh, maybe it's predominantly African-American residents. So it's prohibited by law, and there's certain aspects and forms of redlining that continue. But this is the right to own property. So there would be access even to be able to own it without discrimination. Okay. Now, freedom of expression. When you think of freedom of expression, I think that the first thought that comes to mind is, oh, it's freedom of speech, right? So this is the second of my 2 Hunter College quotes, a different student in this one. It's the freedom of speech. Oops, okay, yes, I've already jumped ahead there. She said, freedom of expression is something everyday people use as a superpower to bring about change and fight for rights that are being abused. Can be a powerful tool. It can be a powerful tool. But let's think about what other forms of expression should be protected in addition to speech. Okay. Gender expression. So this article has been invoked to protect against discrimination against LGBTQ people. How about how you express yourself in what you wear, right? How you wear your hair. Remember, freedom of expression without discrimination on any of those prohibited grounds. So discriminating against someone for their hair texture or style, braids, locks, twists, violates this right. It has been used to address these issues, freedom of expression. Okay. This clause in the Universal Declaration includes, it says the right to freedom of expression includes the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information. So 2 quick examples there. One is receiving information and accurate information about reproductive and sexual health. All right. So documented that women's lack of access to accurate information about reproductive and sexual health makes it difficult for them to enjoy full protection of their well-being. Oh, thank you. I brought some of my own. Thank you so much. Okay. And another example, the right to receive information about activities that are planned in your community that might affect your health. This is so important in the environmental justice arena. And I'll give example. I'm running out of time, so we'll get into that maybe during the Q&A. Now, these articles start the economic and social rights section. There is a completely false myth that the economic, social, and cultural rights included in the Declaration were because, oh yes, the Soviet bloc, they're the ones who were pushing for those. The West was interested in civil and political rights, and the Soviet bloc was interested in economic, social, and cultural rights. That's simply not true. I've only heard Americans say that, now that I think about it, because it was understood by many, many countries that they're really interdependent. The concept of rights as interdependent and indivisible, that if you don't have enough food, how on earth can you fully take part in your right to participate in government or education? If you're hungry in the classroom, you simply cannot focus as well, right? Shelter, and so forth. So the right to work without discrimination, the fact that name discrimination is still rampant, right? The study from some years back where they found that identical resumes, employers are more likely to call back applicants with sort of stereotypically white names, like the ones they give are Emily or Greg, as opposed to applicants with names like Jamal or Lakeisha. And recent studies repeating that is somewhat down, but it still happens. So just one more current example. And the fair wage, ensuring an existence worthy of human dignity. When I read that now, I think of the organizing materials for the 1963 March on Washington. And it said, why we march, why we march. And one of the things, and what we demand, and one of the demands was to have a fair wage. And it's in essence, to have an existence worthy of human dignity. That concept was actually in the 1963 March on Washington materials. So very quickly on education. Okay, I think the right to education is one of the most important rights and of all. It's the key. It's access to so many things. Well, interestingly, the Supreme Court of West Virginia, had a case before it where it was challenging the way schools were being funded, where the wealthier districts had way more resources and the poor district had very few resources. And this was challenged. Now, the Constitution of West Virginia has the right to education, as do many constitutions of states in this country. But the Supreme Court of West Virginia ruled that that mode of funding was actually a violation of the Constitution. And to buttress their argument about how important education is, the Supreme Court of West Virginia cited the Universal Declaration. He said, after all, the right to an education is a fundamental human right. Citation, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, so we can think about what rights are not included in the Declaration. We don't have time for that. So now you see the whole list of treaties that followed. These are binding, right? So a state that ratifies these treaties, that now it is binding, and there's a whole mechanism developed to implement. So since these rights are universal, I'm just sharing in maybe 15 seconds some of the people working on human rights around the world that I had the incredible honor and pleasure to meet with. The only time I was back in Bangkok, city of my birth, was many years later with the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. She held a consultation for women's rights activists from the Asia Pacific region. So these women are from all over the Asia Pacific region. On the left is Maina Kiai, this incredible human rights activist from Kenya who became a UN official himself. But I know him because he was heading the Africa division in Amnesty International in London when I headed the legal department. And so we got to meet up years later in Geneva, and I got to introduce my students to him, which is thrilling. But his work is absolutely phenomenal on the right to protest and peaceful assembly. Oh gosh, okay. So in India, this lawyer in Jaipur noticed that some people would be going into the police station perfectly healthy and they came out dead. And so she put together a complaint saying that the government wasn't protecting their right to life and protecting against the conditions that treatment that led to them to die. And she got a court judgment that incorporated verbatim the 12-point human rights-based program to stop torture. So the court, she said, here's a program to stop torture. And the judge incorporated into his court order. Unfortunately, the government won the appeal and it's been stayed, but okay, we don't have, oh gosh. So, one thing about this work is you meet the most amazing people. I'll tell you about Vera Chera during the Q&A or afterwards. One of the most phenomenal people you can ever meet. And similarly, Asma Jahangir and Hina Jalani, many amazing stories. So I'm going to end here. Eleanor Roosevelt. And this is actually the segue into the next segment of the program, because we've been looking in these very last few examples globally. Now we're going to look locally. And she said, where do human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small, they can't be seen on any maps of the world, but they're the world of the individual person. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Okay. Be kind. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for your overview of the Declaration and the articles in the Declaration. I think there's lots for us to explore there, and it's hard to do that in such a short period of time, but I would invite you all to take a look. We will distribute some links after the event so that you can learn more about human rights from home as you read a little bit more. So I'd like to actually call upon Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins now to share some brief remarks with our audience today. We just wanted to be respectful of your time, so thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to see so many people out on what is a very, very rainy afternoon. to talk about something that I know each and every one of us, if we are not focused on or had not been focused on, are now focused on, because every single day we are called upon to figure out where is our humanity, not only for in our individual spaces, but in our county, in our communities, in our nation, in the world. Stephanie, thank you so much for giving us an overview. And as I was thinking about 75 years, I'm saying everybody knows somebody who's 75 years old. And I say that because it's important to realize that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not that old. And there was the back and forth about who, what, how much. And that conversation, which again is only 75 years old, was what took place in Westchester County. Because we knew there was a broad declaration of human rights. But when I became a county legislator back in 1996, and there had been a defacing of synagogues with swastikas in Texaco, which was a major company on the Golden Mile in Westchester, the Black employees were saying, why are we being called black jelly beans? And as a legislator new to government, I asked a simple question: what happens in Westchester County when human rights are violated? And it was not a simple answer. They told me that you could go to the state human rights division if you couldn't get it mediated in your local human rights satellite. And when we had the hearing, it was very clear that if you were not able to figure this out on your local community, you could stand on a line that would go as long as maybe 10 years. And so a violation of your human rights, whether it was in business or in, finding a place to live, would be something that maybe someone would address 10 years from now. And I said, Westchester County with 1 million people was better than that. They told me that Westchester County transcended discrimination and I should not worry. And I didn't believe them. And the hearing that we had, and I want to give a shout out to one of my mentors, Lois Bronze, who had tried even before that time to see if she could make it happen. It didn't. And things started to evolve on the board. And by the time I got there, and not only were we talking about discrimination in religion and race and so on and so forth, but the LGBTQ community stood up and said, what about us? I could still be discriminated against just for being, gay. What about us? And then the fight ensued. And for 2 years, the people who told me as a woman, as a Black woman, that, okay, we'll respect you, maybe human rights around you, but not them. And so then it became the conversation. And at that point, George Latimer was chair of the board. And it became a conversation that talked about how do we create an anti-discrimination commission that discriminates? How do you even justify that? I'll cover you and you, but not you. How does that work? So that's when the fight really, and I will say that in Westchester County, after 2 years, groups from all over, faith leaders and social justice groups and ordinary people who said, wait a minute, we are better than this, came together. And the Human Rights Commission was born in Westchester County that has a right to not only mediate, but goes beyond that. has a right to educate, goes beyond that. It has subpoena power. It can levy fines and violations. It can change behavior. And I am happy when I look back at my career. Right now, I'm Andrea Stewart Cousins. I'm the leader of the state Senate in New York, the first woman who's ever led a legislative body in this state. I am happy to say that this kid from the projects who did not have any role models that look like me, that I knew of, certainly in these kinds of positions, fought in my first role for human rights. It is a journey, and I say this to the young people, don't be dismayed. This is a fight that goes on and on and on. But when we are blessed to have places in our own county whose job it is to focus on it and to fight for you, it's incredible. And we have here an executive director who is going to be speaking next, Tejas Shajam, who will explain to you what he's doing. I'm sorry, Tejas Sanchali, yes, who will explain to you exactly what is happening in Westchester County, how that's done, what the intersections are, how his incredible board, which again reflects the diversity of Westchester County, is fighting every day to make sure that it wasn't just a paper tiger human rights commission, but it was a real, and is today, a real human rights commission. So that when I have something going on, I call Tejas because I know this is real. But it is only as real as the leadership that we continue to elect that believes in human rights. You're going to hear from Judge Shako, amazing judge who's going to talk about how these rights happen within the judicial system. Again, so important for us to pick judges who believe in human rights. It is in your hands. This is the last thing I'm going to say. I hope I've introduced Tejas, who's amazing. Vera Shaker, who is amazing. But none of these people got here without legislators, executives, people who are able to pass legislation that says we need these things. And if we don't use the power in our hands to vote for people who believe in our rights as humans to be able to achieve all these great things, we will go backward very quickly. 75 years is not a long time. I really, really thank you, NHCR. I don't know where Marcia is, but thank you for being ever present and ever reminding us of the responsibilities we have as citizens, as human beings, and as people who understand human rights. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Stewart Cousins. And Marcia regrets that she can't be with us today, but she welcomes you and everyone else here. So thank you. So I'd like to actually call upon Colleen from our board to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Tejas Shanchala. So Colleen, please.
Thank you, Nicolina, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for being here with us, as Senator Andrew Stewart Cousins noted, on this very rainy day. So we appreciate that. I have the honor of introducing Mr. Tejas Sanchala, who last year was with us online. So we are making some progress. Nice to see an in-person event that is well attended. So thanks again. I'll give you some of his background information. Mr. Sanchala was appointed Executive Director of the Westchester County Human Rights Commission in 2019. The Human Rights Commission, a division of county government, enforces and administers the county's human rights law and fair housing law. and conducts education and outreach on rights and obligations under these laws and ways to combat hate and discrimination. Mr. Sanchala has spoken at many events on xenophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination, hate incidents, and the importance of belonging and inclusion. Prior to joining the Human Rights Commission, Mr. Sanchala was a skilled and sought-after civil rights attorney for over 2 decades in private practice with a focus on advancing justice in employment discrimination and housing discrimination matters. In this capacity, he successfully represented many clients in combating discriminatory policies and practices. He is a trained mediator, arbitrator, and facilitator for discussions on race and identity. He is a longtime resident of Westchester County, and he enjoys mentoring students in high school, college, and law school, which is good to know, right, for some of the students here. Tejas, we welcome you.
I don't see my PowerPoint. It's there? Oh. To come to your program today to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of the Human Rights document. I joined the Human Rights Commission 4.5 years ago. I feel like I've aged 45 years in that 4.5 years. But, you know, people say the most challenging time is the best time to do that work. And I would agree with that sentiment. So in 12 short minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the protections in the county's human rights law and fair housing law and talk about some of our programmatic efforts. But first, you know, it gives me great pride to speak after the Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins. I would not be standing here as the executive director of the agency without her, without our current county executive, George Latimer, who is the chair of the Board of Legislators at that time, and the late Lois Bronze. Together, the three of them really championed the passage of this law. And you may not think a lot of the things that Professor Farrier talked about on her slideshow we take for granted today. And they certainly weren't taken for granted 75 years ago, and even 24 years ago in 1999 in Westchester County. Many of those things were not taken for granted. And there is a ad that opponents of the passage of the human rights law took out in our local papers. And opponents took out ads saying that the human rights law officially promotes homosexuality. Sexual orientation is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Those were ads that were taken out in Westchester County in 1999 to dissuade legislators from voting for passage of this bill. So the law was pioneering when it was created. And these are hard-fought protections that we must continue to safeguard. And I like to think that the law is still pioneering because we are ahead of the curve in state and federal protections. The county was first when it passed protections for citizenship status, for gender identity, for gender expression, for protections under the fair housing law for source of income and domestic violence status and sexual abuse status. So these protections show you how the law can be a beacon, and I'll talk about some of our work afterwards. On our chart here, we also talk about how the county's Human Rights Commission is a partner with HUD. We partner with the Federal Fair Housing Division to talk about investigating complaints of housing discrimination. If somebody files a complaint of housing discrimination with HUD in Westchester County, it is referred to our office for investigation. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a small but mighty team. We have 8 people on our team, and we have a dynamic board of 15 board members that are led by Reverend Doris K. Dalton and Reverend Dr. Stephen Pogue. One of our board members, Jenny Bernard, is here. I just wanted to raise her hand so you can say hi to her afterwards. And we also have a member of our team, Mayo Bartlett, who's sitting right behind her. Mayo is a distinguished civil rights attorney. And he comes and speaks with us on talking about combating hate, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ hate to students in schools. Together, we've spoken to thousands of students within the past couple of years. So in terms of our education and outreach program, I think that we do very robust education outreach program we do, but a lot of that programming, I think, is informed by my constant thoughts of Dr. King's words. People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they haven't communicated with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they're separated from one another. And I think those words still ring true today and resonate today in terms of where our housing is located and segregated in certain communities. On this slideshow, there's a couple of programs that we did, and I just want to highlight two of them. One was with the Lenape Center, and we were really privileged to have the Lenape Center come and talk about the history of Indigenous people in the Hudson Valley. And they were able to present it in April of this year. And for Fair Housing Month, we also talked about the past, present, and future of fair housing. Fair Housing Month is every April to commemorate on April 8th, the signing of the Fair Housing Act. But what most people may not know is this is the 55th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act being passed. As a lawyer, I love the law. Law is not a panacea. Law is not everything. We need people to go out and help enforce the law. The black-white home ownership gap today is still significant and maybe even greater today than it was in 1968 when the law was passed. And Professor Farrier mentioned redlining. Senate Majority Leader mentioned redlining. And while there may not be redlining in the traditional terms that the federal government had proposed in the 1940s, redlining still exists today. The U.S. Department of Justice got one of its largest, actually the largest settlement in a redlining case in the past year. It was $31 million. And it was involving a bank that was not providing certain locations in certain communities. So these things, as many have said, are not ancient history. So the areas that we protect in discrimination are employment, housing, places of public accommodations like stores, doctors' offices, and restaurants. It's important to remember that the law provides protections for the approximate 500,000 employees and independent contractors who work in Westchester County and the 1 million people who live or travel to Westchester County. I'm very fortunate that we have a very proactive county executive. And our law was amended in 2021 to include protections for discriminatory harassment. We were finding that about 50% of hate-related incidents occurred in parks, on streets, in area between neighbors and single-family homes. And those are areas that the Human Rights Commission did not have jurisdiction over. In December of 2021, our law was amended and now includes protections for certain types of hate-related crimes. And there could be other issues as well. So I can talk a lot more about our areas of protection, but I just want to let you know that we are a resource here for you. If you experience or witness discrimination in Westchester County, an individual has 1 year to file a complaint with our office. And as the executive director, I have the ability to file a pattern and practice case. So if we are aware of a pattern or practice of discrimination, and an individual is reluctant to file it because they fear retaliation, that may be something that the agency can do on their behalf. And I'll give you an example later when we talk about it. And in the last 4 years I've been here, in the first 4 years, the number of complaints we've had have gone up 800%. That doesn't mean that these cases are just happening now. People are understanding that there's a resource for them in the community. So this slide just briefly talks about the 17 protected classes that are covered by the county's human rights law. And we've mentioned many of them already, but I just want to highlight race, religion, national origin, gender, age, and familial status. So I'll just give a couple of examples of employment discrimination because it occurs at any phase in the relationship before you get hired or upon separation. So important to know, the human rights law was amended this year. It now applies to every employer in Westchester County, with the one exception of counties of employees of the county of Westchester. So just some examples that you may think about, like, oh, I didn't realize that was a human rights law violation. 1 out of 4 people, 1 out of 4 US adults identifies as having a disability. That could have a mental disability, a physical disability. The law protects against both. And one of the main issues that's now coming on is issues of reasonable accommodation. An individual needs a reasonable accommodation to perform the essential functions of his or her own job. And I think that is just going to get greater as we are in this current environment. Long COVID in certain circumstances can be recognized as a disability under the law as well. And individuals with disabilities, we've talked a lot about that during COVID. And, there was a hierarchy of human value. Who deserves a ventilator? Who doesn't deserve a ventilator? And I think it's important to make sure that folks know about those protections. Discriminatory terms and conditions in the workplace, that can be on any number of things, but to prop on what Professor Ferrier said, the law was amended this year to also include protections for race discrimination, which includes hair texture, braids, locks. And so those are now included. And I was asked to talk a little bit about students and young people. And I just want to highlight, there was a 17-year-old student in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She went to go apply for a job at Abercrombie and Fitch. She wore a hijab as part of her Muslim faith. Abercrombie and Fitch said, you don't really fit our look policy. They didn't hire her. Most 17-year-olds probably would have stopped at that point. She got a lawyer. She fought the case at the district level. She went to the appeals court. She went all the way up to the Supreme Court and she won 8-1. And the Supreme Court found that the employer cannot refuse to hire an applicant to avoid accommodating a religious accommodation or practice. So I'll talk about some other young people later too, but I wanted to highlight that. We hear a lot about wage theft. Wage theft is a $15 billion a year industry. And wage theft has an intersectionality with discrimination. If an individual has an issue involving wage theft and they haven't been paid for the work that they earned at their employer, they can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission too, if it's the employer that's saying, I'm only paying the men, I'm not paying the women. I'm only paying this category, I'm not paying that category. So we've started to receive complaints on discrimination on that basis as well. It's now the 6th anniversary of the Me Too movement, and there's been an explosion in number of sexual harassment cases in the workplace. So we've seen that. And the last one I just want to highlight here is retaliation. People always tell me they're concerned, well, if I come forward, will I be retaliated against? And the law has anti-retaliation protections. So if somebody does come forward and they're discriminated against, they can have another claim that sometimes can be more valuable than the underlying discrimination claim. Housing discrimination, which some of our speakers have spoken about already. It's reported that there are 4 million instances of housing discrimination that occur every year in our country. And like hate-related incidents and discrimination, only a small fraction of those are reported. So right now, according to the National Fair Housing Alliance, the number of fair housing discrimination complaints that are filed nationally is at the highest level since they've ever been collecting the data, but it comes nowhere near that 4 million number. Disability discrimination is the #1 basis for housing discrimination complaints that are filed nationally, whether it's somebody that needs an emotional support animal in their apartment, their condo, their co-op, or it's somebody who needs a ramp or a modification so they can properly access their home and have equal egress and ingress to come out of it. We did a education outreach campaign that reached 38 million people on sexual harassment in housing. If you think about sexual harassment in the workplace, there is an economic duress issue, but I can quit my job. If I'm being sexually harassed by my landlord and my landlord won't provide the repairs or won't come to my unit, think about that. Your home is where you're supposed to be safe. And we saw there was a spike in reported sexual harassment cases. On the last slide here, there's a threat by a landlord to call ICE. During the pandemic, we heard some landlords say, if you don't leave by tomorrow, I'm calling ICE. Now, notwithstanding, there was an eviction moratorium and they couldn't do that regardless. People left. Those are types of cases where people are reluctant to file a complaint with our office, even though our office provides protections, whether you're documented or undocumented. So that's an example of a type of case we'd look at potentially bringing in as executive director initiated complaint. If somebody in an apartment building wants to put a mezuzah on their door and the landlord says, no, you can have a Christmas wreath, that may form the basis of a religious discrimination case. And just to touch base on what Stephanie said about redlining. Redlining ended when the Fair Housing Act passed legally, but the effects still remain. And there was a great article in the LA Times last year that talked about how communities that were redlined have a greater rate of asthma and other health-related conditions today that kids face today because of those communities being redlined. So those issues still remain with us today. Discriminatory harassment, I've spoken about briefly. This is intended to give people another opportunity and avenue to file a complaint. It is not to replace the opportunity for somebody to go to the police. The police would be a criminal forum. To come before us would be a civil forum. So it is just another opportunity for folks. Potential remedies. You heard the Senate Majority Leader talk about how this agency has teeth, and we can hold hearings for an administrative law judge, and we could issue compensatory damages, punitive damages, reasonable accommodations, civil fines, and attorney's fees. We had a recent settlement for $100,000 in one of our cases last month. So it is an area where we want people to come and feel that it is a credible avenue of justice for them. Talking about young people, we have some young people in the room, and it's funny, you think about our memory of Dr. King now, and he was deeply unpopular when he was alive, and he was 26 years old. It's a relatively unknown pastor, and he got thrust into the Montgomery bus boycott. Most of us in this room know on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to stand up and give her seat to a white man on a bus. Most of us don't know, 4 days later, Dr. King was picked to be the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott at 26. That boycott went on for a year, and he emerged as the prominent civil rights leader that he is. And 12 and a half years later, just short of his 40th birthday, he passed away. I mentioned here about 17-year-old Darnella Frazier. And Darnella is on this list because of her work as an upstander. She was walking down the street with her cousin when she came upon the police encounter involving George Floyd. She decided to record the incident. If she hadn't recorded the incident, our memory and our record of that incident would be very different. Because of her recording, there was a global movement, and it galvanized the largest racial justice movement in my lifetime in the country, where over 23 million people came out and spoke out against racial injustices. She's now won a Pulitzer Prize. She's 17 years old. 17 years old, I had a hard time tying my shoelaces. So here's our contact information. You can contact us. We're happy to speak to you offline if you have any issues or any questions you'd like to discuss. I'm an optimistic person, and I like dessert. So I'm going to end on a hopeful note. We sponsored a series of programs with author Heather McGhee. And Heather McGhee wrote a book that I encourage everybody to hear called The Sum of Us, and how we all lose with racism. And she talks about how racism is not a zero-sum game, or it's not a pie. If Stephanie has more rights, doesn't mean I get less rights. It doesn't mean if Annie gets more rights, I don't get less rights. And in fact, we all lose when there's discrimination. Studies have shown that discrimination hurts our economy. Citibank did a study, and it found that since 2000, the US economy has lost 16 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars as a result of discrimination against African Americans. That's discrimination against one group. And there are similar studies involving ageism as well. And we all have a role to play in fighting discrimination. And the last slide is an invitation. I'm happy to be here to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Human Rights Day, but I invite you to come to the Human Rights Commission Thursday, where we're going to celebrate Human Rights Day with a timely presentation on talking about the differences between hate crimes, hate incidents, and discrimination, what you can do. That program is intended to talk about local issues, not international issues. But I encourage you to all come. It's at the County Center. It is a free event. Mr. Bartlett, who's here as well, will be one of the panelists, and the county executive will be providing opening remarks as well. I tried to stay within my time. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Tejas. I'd like to call upon Raina Cadaville, our Young Professionals Co-Chair, to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Nicolina. It is my honor to introduce our next guest speaker, the Honorable Veris B. Shako. Judge Shako was elected to the Yonkers City Court bench in 2020. Judge Shako currently presides over a high volume of criminal, housing, traffic, small claims, and other civil matters directly impacting the lives of many Westchester residents daily. Judge Shako has been designated as an acting family court judge, as an acting county court judge, and as an accessible magistrate for Raise the Age after our arraignments of youth. Prior to her election to the bench, Judge Shako practiced as a criminal defense and family court attorney in Westchester County. She began her career as an attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Westchester County in 2005, where she handled felony cases from arraignment to trial. 4 years later, she opened her own law office where she represented indigent and private litigants on custody, visitation, family offense, neglect, and termination of parental rights cases in Westchester. As an attorney, Judge Shako also represented and defended children as an attorney for the child. With 18 years of combined experience as a judge and litigator, Judge Shako is fortunate to now decide some of the very issues she argued as an attorney. She presides with an open mind, intent on ensuring that the parties understand their rights, the proceedings within which they are involved, are given an opportunity to be heard, and are treated fairly. She understands that the resolution of a court matter can have a profound impact, not just on the person standing before the court, but also on that person's ability to be with their family, that person's current and future employment opportunities, prospective housing opportunities, and so much more. Judge Shako is equally passionate about her work off the bench as she is about her work on the bench. Judge Shako serves as a judicial mentor to aspiring judges, sits on the Pipeline Diversity Initiative, which introduces high school students to the law school admissions process, and assists in judging moot court and mock trial competitions for high school students, college students, and law students. Judge Shako is strongly committed to serving through her work on and off the bench. She is personally fulfilled by her work and will continue to protect the rights of those who come before her court. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Judge Shako.
Good afternoon, everyone. You can sit. Okay. So I brought a clicker with me, because I was afraid that I would forget to click. So the presentation is up. So it's wonderful to be here with you, and I am thankful to you, UNA USA Westchester, the Links Incorporated, the AKA Zeta Nu Omega chapter, Westback, Manhattanville College, Mercer University, to be here celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. So human rights for all in our courts is extremely important. And that's important based on my background as a criminal defense attorney and a family court attorney. I couldn't just walk away. You continue with who you are and what's important, which is serving our community. As a judge, our judicial branch resolves disputes. We look at the facts and apply legal principles, case law, statutes to determine who is responsible in our cases. But there are many other considerations and protections that are not specifically spelled out in the Black letter law that are necessary for a fair, equal, and just application of the law in our courts. Let's think about someone who's accused of a crime, or someone who's accused of violating a contract, perhaps a lease agreement, not paying their rent, or staying past the expiration of the lease. These are common issues or common cases that come into many of our local courts. As a judge, normally we look at the elements and see whether or not those elements show a violation of the law or the contract. Then we look at the facts to see if the facts alleged are sufficient to support the elements. This is a straightforward, black and white application of the law. But we know that the world we live in isn't black and white. There are other things that we have to think about. And this applies in so many of our court proceedings, whether we're in criminal court, and you see a felony complaint here from criminal court, but we have court filings that look and present a case in a black and white format when you're in landlord-tenant court, when you're in family court, when you're in traffic court, you get a summons. We've all probably received a summons, but there's more that goes on and goes beyond the paperwork that's filed. In matrimonial matters, criminal cases, civil cases, there's so much more than the paperwork. As judges, it's important to take a more holistic approach when we can to determine the underlying issue that's bringing this person into the court. Looking at cases from this perspective helps to reduce any and all chances of recidivism. So how do we do that? Well, we listen closely to the attorneys and the litigants who are before the court. We observe the litigant. We observe how they engage with their attorney, the court, and others. We also seek out information to learn about what happened and why at each and every stage of the proceeding. Cases are different. Respondents or defendants are different. You may have a defendant who comes before the court and seeks help and is vocal about it and pushes the attorney to ask for help. And then you have cases that are not quite that simple, and the attorney has to advocate and perhaps counsel their client to ask for help if help is needed. But at the end of the day, as a judge and as someone participating in the proceedings before the court, we're looking to figure out why this person is before the court and to make sure that something is done to prevent this from reoccurring. So in looking at cases that come before the court is saying, looking through the paperwork, looking at the demeanor of the parties, is there an issue? Is there an alcohol issue? Is there an allegation of alcohol abuse, substance abuse? Is there an allegation or reason to believe that there may be untreated mental health issues or concerns? Anger management issues, housing issues, financial issues that made someone feel like they were cornered and had to do something that necessarily they wouldn't do? Is there domestic violence involved? Is this defendant a victim of domestic violence? Is there a health issue involved that perhaps contributed to this person doing something that landed them here in court? So why do we look at the full picture? We look at the full picture because deciding guilt or liability without consideration of any of these issues when they are present, or without looking to determine whether there's a contributing factor, is not looking at the full picture of why this person is in court. The court has options. We can proceed in one of two ways. We can just encourage a resolution holding the person accountable, or we can encourage the person to utilize the opportunity to address the issue that brought them into court through services. If the person accepts the opportunity for treatment, then the court can consider resolving the case in a way that does not create burdens or hurdles for this person to move on with their lives when this case ends. I think of these issues holistically. It is to our benefit to have people live law-abiding lives in our community. Services may help the litigant get back on track, or it may prevent someone else from being victimized. It benefits us all to have a person receive treatment to address the underlying issue. In appropriate cases, it can help prevent future contact with the justice system. Fortunately, we live in a time when such an approach is encouraged in our justice system. I quite enjoyed last year's UNA USA Westchester Human Rights Day, where Judge Kathy Davidson, Dean of the Judicial Institute, and former administrative judge for the 9th Judicial District presented. She, along with Judge Jared Rice and Judge Lyndon Williams, spoke about the work they do to ensure restorative justice within our courts. She works in the grip court, and the two judges, Judge Rice and Judge Williams, are part of the Emerging Justice Court, which seeks to give young people an opportunity through treatment and services to get back on the right track. I can only imagine how life-changing these courts are for the young people who appear before them. Here in Westchester, there are additional specialty criminal courts. There are mental health courts, both at the local, city, town, village levels, and also at the county court level. There are also drug courts at the local city levels and also at the county court level. There are veterans court for issues that veterans face that result in the veterans ending up in court also. There is an integrated domestic violence court for litigants who have both a criminal case and a co-occurring family court case at the same time. And there is a youth part in our county court, in addition to the youth parts in Mount Vernon and New Rochelle. And this is just a few of the courts or specialty courts that are available here in Westchester County. Most importantly, these courts are institutionalized. That means despite any change in leadership or within the court system, these specialty courts continue on. Outside of these specialty courts, their regular courts or the regular parts can make referrals for services that the court believes a litigant needs. For instance, there's TASK, treatment alternatives for a safer community. When a court believes that a litigant needs perhaps substance abuse or alcohol or anger management or any other service, and that litigant is willing to take advantage of it, the court can make the referral for that service. There's mental health. There is a program called Mental Health Alternatives to Incarceration for individuals who need more intensive mental health counseling. There is also a program named Choice, and they are guardians ad litems that can be appointed in civil and housing cases. So respondents who cannot adequately defend themselves and represent themselves in issues as important as housing can get assistance so that they can get to the result that they need in their cases. These referrals allow litigants to receive necessary services, even if their case is not sent to one of the specialty parts. Most importantly, they're free, so there's no financial barrier to receiving the services that they need. These services allow the litigants to have the opportunity to be restored and get back on track, reducing their exposure to more punitive results at the conclusion of their case. It gives them a better opportunity to live a law-abiding life, better protecting their human rights in our courts, which benefits us all as a community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Shako, and your assistant as well. Did a great job. What a great message to conclude our presentations with. So for our members of the audience here, if you do have any questions that you've jotted down for our Q&A, please hand them to Craig over there in the red shirt in the back of the room. And just before we continue to the interactive portion of our program, I'd like to call upon Raina once again from our board to introduce the Youth Declaration. Thank you, Raina.
Thank you once again, Nicolina, and hello again, everyone. I'm very proud to represent UNA Westchester's young professionals here today, along with my co-chair, Paul Presendu, it's right over there, to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The United Nations Association of USA, which the UNA Westchester is a chapter of, has created and launched the Declaration of Human Rights by American Youth. Using the framework of the UN Declaration of Human Rights and findings from the 2022 American Youth Priorities Report, this declaration captures the voices, feedback, and leadership of youth from across the United States. Young people are the future world leaders, and this declaration will serve as a unified proclamation that youth not only care about the future of human rights, but youth are taking action today to advance the rights of those in their local communities. This declaration can be used as a guiding document for understanding and acting on youth priorities for organizations like UNA USA and external stakeholders we engage with, such as the State Department, UN Youth Envoy Office, US UN Mission, and UN Youth Delegates, and can be found online on the UNA USA website. The young professionals of UNA Westchester are delighted to support and further the work of this declaration. If you would like to get involved in this work, please speak to myself or to Paul after this program. Thank you so much.
All right, now as we turn to the Q&A portion of our program, I'd like to call our distinguished panelists back up to the stage, Ms. Stephanie Ferrier, Mr. Tejas Shanchala, and Judge Vereshcheko. Please come take your seats on the stage. Accompanying them will be Paul Presendu, our YP co-chair, who will facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you, Paul.
Sit down. Oh, I see.
Perfect, perfect. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned before, my name is Paul Presendu. I am the co-chair of the United Nations Association of Westchester County Chapter, alongside Raina Cataville, who is my partner in crime in youth equity for our international community. So we have a couple of questions that some of you were able to pass around. We have time for 2 questions due to our program. So the first question, and obviously I'll ask a question and I'll pass it around for each of you to be able to submit an answer. First question. As threats against human rights continue to rise internationally and eventually domestically, what can younger generations specifically do in order to reverse this now and in the future?
I can go first. So I think one of the most important things we can do is to start talking civilly to one another. And I think part of the issue is people don't talk to one another anymore, and they just go in their silos and the echo chambers and they say, oh, I couldn't convince Paul, he's wrong. In his 2-minute in conversation, he's never going to get it. I'm writing him off and I'm not going to do it. And I think one of our prior Human Rights Day programs talked about how to talk to your friends and family about race. And there is a dialogue skill that comes with that, but I think that is a skill that is lost on folks right now. And I think it's important for young people to be able to do that. And then the second thing I would just say is there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation. So it's something that our board member, Jenny Bernard, talks about a lot, and being able to critically think and be able to recognize certain things. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my other colleagues.
I think, go ahead.
Well, I would say ditto. Um, Not to get up answering. Yeah, I honestly think I'd be scared if I were a lot younger than I am. I'm scared as an older person. It's really, really challenging. And I think we just need to acknowledge that. And then the talking to each other. I remember when I was in college, I was an activist then as well. And I thought, I was interested in working on kind of the big picture issues and doing things maybe at a grand level. I was younger, so that's sort of how I was aiming. And I will never forget that there was one of the leaders of AIM, the American Indian Movement, was at our college and gave a talk. And I asked a similar question to him, and he gave a similar answer to what we just heard. He said, talk to your family, talk to the people around you. And at the time, I thought, that's so small. It's not. It's, it really, we just go back to that quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, right? That it begins at home. And how are we going to change the big picture without changing things around us? So it took me many years to understand the wisdom of what he shared, and is in my view, very wise what he shared with me. Thanks.
Thank you. I would echo what Tejas and Stephanie said, and just add, just as important as it is to have dialogue, it's just as important to really listen and understand what the other person is saying and put yourself in the shoes of that other person. And I think that can make a huge difference. So I would say listening actively also.
Thank you so much. Great answers from everyone. All right, so our next question is, does the quality of the environment, including pollution and access to the outdoors or green space, fall within the realm of human rights? Are there adequate legal grounds for the growing environmental justice movement?
Yes. So it's interesting in law anyway, international human rights law developed in its silo, international environmental law developed in its silo, and eventually people in both fields realized there was a lot to learn from the other in order to address what's happening environmentally around us. And there's really, I have to say, extraordinary work being done now. The UN Environment Program, well, the UN keeps changing their websites. At least last time I looked, it was an amazing resource. Every so often they shift things around. But for understanding the rights that are affected by environmental pollution, by toxics, and then the environmental justice aspects where the air pollution that children are subjected to by decisions to site pollution spewing factories in poor areas more heavily populated by Black and brown people, is the impact on health is staggering. Clearly human rights violation. So there are actually a lot of organizations that are doing work in this area. And I'm not sure really locally, because I tend to be sort of, even from my birth, sort of globally oriented. But I'm sure that there are groups locally that are working on these issues as well. But it's absolutely a human rights area. And what's really cool is that looking at what's going to finally bring about change. So you publicize, you try and name and shame. So there's so much money on the other side. What's going to counter that? Well, interestingly, there's actually some effective litigation going on now. Some of it in the States and then globally as well, that is very environmental justice oriented. And there's entire websites devoted to all of that. So I see it actually is very promising. Final word is when the person was asked, the sole remaining drafter of the Universal Declaration was asked, what did you not include in the declaration that you would back then that you would now. And he said environmental, the environment. It really has been taken up to the extent that it is not only just linking all the different rights that we saw in the declaration, showing it's the right to life, to health. It affects education. It affects so many rights. And I just lost my train of thought, sorry. So there was a move to declare the right to a healthy environment as its own distinct right. You don't have to go through all of this rigmarole, linking it here and there and so on. It simply is a basic human right to have a healthy environment. And that's been adopted now by the UN General Assembly. Okay, again, it's hortatory, it's not binding, but that was a very important decision. The United States, we were lobbying really hard to keep them from trying to oppose it because they're really not, the US government, not really into economic, social, and cultural issues, and they mostly affect economic, social, and cultural issues, these environmental problems, many of them. And they abstained. At least they didn't vote against. But that is a really important development as well. There's a lot of really great work, and you can join in that as well.
I'll just add a quick point. We're very fortunate in Westchester County. We have one law school. Our only law school is headed by Dean Anderson, and the Elizabeth House School of Law is known for being the top, one of the top, if not the top, law schools on environmental law. So folks who are interested in that may want to reach out to the law school to see if they could work on some projects or some activities that they're doing.
Thank you. And this will be our last question. Is there a term limit for filing a discrimination case?
Time limit. So yeah, so that is for the lawyers in the room, you can appreciate the answer. It depends. So so the time limits to file a claim are called statute of limitations under the law. And the statute of limitations are different under federal law, state law, and county law. So generally for the Westchester County human rights law, it's 1 year to file with our office. It is 3 years in employment sexual harassment based cases for things that happened after June 6th, 2023. But I'm happy to speak to anybody offline if they have any questions about their individual situation about that.
Thank you so much. Thank all three of you for taking the time, and thank you all for submitting questions for this Q&A section.
Thank you for the discussion. I know we had so many interesting questions, but just to be respectful of everyone's time here, we're going to move on. And I'd like to call upon Craig Sevilla Donnelly just to say a few quick words before we get to the reception. Craig? Oh, hey, he doesn't need a mic.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. On behalf of Manhattanville, soon to be University. Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, fellow community. My name is Craig Sevilla Donnelly, and I've been blessed and honored to be the director of the Sister Mary T. Clark RCJ Center for Religion and Social Justice. Say that 5 times fast. We just say Clark Center for short. We are honored to host this amazing event here at Manhattanville College. The Clark Center just recently partnered up with the United Nations Association Westchester chapter this past summer, and we look forward for many more moments to come. I just want to give a special shout out. The Clark Center is a center that does community service, social justice, activism advocacy, religion and spirituality. And we have some Clark scholars in the back that do 30,000 hours of service every single academic year, whether it be in community service, social justice, activism, advocacy, and religion and spirituality. And we are big on human rights as well. A lot of our organizations, we work with 200 organizations that deal with human rights. So on behalf of the Clark Center at Manhattanville College, soon to be Manhattanville University, April 2024, check your emails. I wanted to say we are glad to host this event. We look forward to our partnership for years to come. And as someone that is a part of an interracial relationship, a marriage where my father came from Ireland and my mother came from Puerto Rico that fought for equality and human rights, I'm proud and honored to be here. And we look forward for many more events to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks, Craig. So we've really enjoyed working with the Manhattanville team. They've been excellent and so fun to work with. So thank you. So as our formal program concludes, I want to once again express our gratitude to our speakers, our board, and our co-sponsors. Your contributions have made today's event both possible and memorable, and we thank you so much. We also extend a special thanks to all leaders and volunteers who have worked with us behind the scenes. And to our audience, your participation has meant everything to us. We hope you've enjoyed the discussions today. We invite you now to continue the conversation during our reception. Please enjoy the refreshments and the opportunity to meet your fellow attendees. And with that, let's all carry forward the spirit of today's discussions and continue to work together for a world where the human rights that we identified 75 years ago are a reality for all. Thank you.